Okay, good morning, all of you. So in today's class, we are going to discuss about exception handling. The concept of exception handling in Java, we will see. So before going to look into this exception handling, so now first of all, let us see what is this exception and what are the common errors in Java program. So not only in Java program, if we consider any program, okay. So generally the program consists of, there are two types of errors. So in a program, if you consider any program, so it has two different types of errors. So one is called compile time error, and the second one is called runtime errors. So there are two types of errors. So one is called compile time error, second one is called runtime error. Okay. So these are the two types of most widely occurred errors in a program. So one is called compile time error, second one is called runtime error. So what is this compile time error? So compile time error means, what is a compile time error? So compile time errors are errors. Errors occurred during compilation process. So errors occurred during compilation process, that is during compiling your Java program. So you may get some errors. Such type of errors are called compile time errors. So with these compile time errors, there is no serious problem. Okay. So, but if you consider another type of error, that is runtime error. So runtime errors are errors occurred during execution of a program. During execution of a program. That is during execution of a program, while executing our Java program. So there might be a chance of occurring some errors. So such type of errors are called runtime errors. Such type of errors are called runtime errors. Okay. So these runtime errors are known as exceptions. Okay. So these runtime errors are called exceptions. Okay. So basically, what is this exception? So exception is a runtime error. So basically, exception is a runtime error. So such a simply known as exceptions. So exceptions are the runtime errors in Java. So these runtime errors in Java program is known as exception. Okay. So now first let us see, before going to discuss in depth about these exceptions. So what are these compile time errors and what are the common runtime errors? This is what we have to see first. First, you need to understand about what are compile time errors, and then we will look into the runtime errors. What are various runtime errors? That is called exceptions, and how to handle those exceptions. We'll see in detail about this particular runtime error. Okay. So these are the two types of errors as we discussed. As I told, so there are two types of errors. One is called the compile time error. Second one is called runtime error. One is called compile time error. Second one is known as the runtime error. Okay. So what are compile time errors? Now if you observe carefully in a Java program, each and every individual statement must ends with a semicolon. So for example, if it is an expression or if it is a statement, So the statement should ends with a semicolon. So if there is a missing of semicolon, so by default it will raise an error that is called compile time error. So that is missing semicolon. And another one is second missing brackets. Sometimes if an expression or if a print statement is there, it must begins with some open bracket and the closed bracket, open parenthesis and closed parenthesis, and open curly brace and closed curly brace. Or if it is an array representation, it begins with open and closed bracket. So these are the missing brackets. This is another type of compile time error. Okay. So this is the second class of compile time error. So one is the missing semicolons. Second one is the missing brackets. And the third one is the misspelling of identifiers or keywords. Misspelling of identifiers or keywords. So during declaration, suppose if I have declared one integer variable, suppose. So if I am declaring integer, suppose sum, there is a variable sum. If I have declared one integer variable like this, integer sum. Now while using, instead of using this capital S, I am using lowercase sum, lowercase sum. So now this causes an exception, that is, this causes an error called compile time error. So that is known as the misspelling of identifiers, or sometimes some keywords are also there. Some keywords are also there. So for example, there is a keyword called in Java, int. Now instead of writing int, I am writing capital I and T. Capital I and T. So now this is going to raise an exception, a compile time error. Okay, that is misspelling of this particular keywords. Or instead of using the keyword final, suppose there is a keyword final is there, FINAL. Now instead of using this final, I am using FINAL. FNAL. So this is going to raise a compile time error. Okay, these are all common compile time errors which comes under this misspelling of the identifiers. Misspelling of identifiers. Next one is missing double quotes in a string. Missing double quotes in a string. Suppose generally strings are enclosed in between these double quotes. If it is a Java string, suppose string string. Okay, so strings should be enclosed in double quotations. Okay, so suppose if there is a missing of this closing double quote, closing double quotation. Now this is going to raise a compile time error. So that is comes under the misspelling or missing double quotes in a string. So this is another type of compile time error. And next one is the use of undeclared variables. Use of undeclared variables. So in general, what is the general rule is, before going to use any variable, so it must be declared. It must be declared. So if you are trying to use a variable without declaring it, suppose I am writing a is equal to 10. So a is the variable, a is not at all initialized, not at all declared. Okay, so this statement obviously raise a compile time error. Okay, this is called use of undeclared variables. This is another type of compile time error. Next, incompatible types assignments. Incompatible types assignments. Suppose if I am trying to assign value to a variable, that is, if there is an integer variable, suppose there is an integer variable x, but here I am trying to assign string. I am trying to assign string to the integer variable x. Now this is going to raise a compile time error. So this is incompatible assignment. Incompatible assignments. Okay, that is string variables is assigned to integer variable x. So this causes a compile time error and a bad reference to an object, bad reference to objects. So objects which are not exist, but you are trying to access. Okay. So that is also raise a compile time error. And the next one is the use of this single equal to instead of double equal. Okay. So that is in general, if a conditional statement is there, suppose on if statement is there, inside the if statement, what we should do is we should write comparison statement. A is equal to B. Now instead of using this double equal to, if you are trying to use single equal to, now this may raise a compile time error. Next, incorrect class or file name. Incorrect class or file name. That is invalid class name, invalid file names. These are also causes a compile time error. These also cause a compile time error. So these are all called compile time errors. Next one is the untraceable code. A code which is not at all traceable. Suppose such type of code is also causing an error that is called compile time error, causing an error known as the compile time error. Okay. So this is another type of compile time error. Okay, these are all comes under some of the compile time errors most widely occurred in a Java program. Okay. Now, on the other hand, second type of category of errors in a program is runtime errors. Next one is the runtime errors. One is the compile time error, second one is the runtime errors. Okay. Now let us see what are various runtime errors. What is the first one? First one is these runtime errors are generally known as the exceptions. We know what is exception. Okay. So runtime errors are generally called exceptions. Runtime errors are called exceptions. Okay. So these runtime errors are known as exceptions. These runtime errors are called exceptions, right? So what are such type of exceptions? Okay. What are such type of most widely occurred exceptions? Okay. One is called arithmetic exception. One is called arithmetic exception. So what is this arithmetic exception? So arithmetic exceptions are generally these type of division by zero errors are called arithmetic exceptions. Okay. Whenever there is an arithmetic error, runtime error, suppose there is a statement called suppose x equal to 10 by 0. If there is a division by zero error, okay, generally division by zero errors comes under this arithmetic exceptions. Comes under arithmetic exception. This is also called illegal arithmetic operations. These are all illegal arithmetic operations. So now these type of statements are generally not detected at the time of the compile time. So this statement is syntactically valid statement. So there is no problem with this statement. So this is as per the uh, correct statement. So as per the Java notation, this statement is a valid statement so that it will not raise any compile time error. So but during execution, now this statement leads to an irrecoverable error. So such an error, runtime error is called exception. So this is called the arithmetic exception. Okay. So this is one type of one type of exception called arithmetic exception. Okay. And second type of exception is called the null pointer exception. Second type is known as the null pointer exception. Now that is accessing a method or a particular field on a null object. Okay, is comes under this null pointer exception. So for example, I am trying to find out the length of a particular string which is null. Suppose there is a statement str is equal to null. That is the string is assigned to null. That is nothing is there in this particular variable. But I want to find out the length of this particular string. So that is str dot length. So now this statement generally returns the length of the string, but here str is assigned to null. It is initialized with null, so that this is raise an exception called null pointer exception. This is known as null pointer exception. This is accessing a method or a field on a null object. So this is known as the null pointer exception. And the third type of exception is known as array index out of bounds exception. Third category is known as the array index out of bounds exception. So now this is raised. This exception is generally raised when index exceeds the array bounds. Index exceeds the array bound. For example, if there is an array like this, so int array A is there. If there are three elements are there. Now index generally begins with this is 0. The index begins with this is 0, this is 1, this is 2. So, but if I am trying to access A of 5, suppose I am trying to access A of 5 now, which is not exist, which does not exist actually. Okay. So now these type of statements raise a runtime error called array index out of bounds exception. That is, index exceeds the array bounds. That is the upper limit. If it exceeds the upper limit of this array index, this is in this example 0, 1, 2. So, but I am trying to access 5. Okay. So 5 does not exist. So that it automatically rise a runtime error. Such a runtime error is called array index out of bounds exception. That is, index exceeds the array bounds. That is, for example, ARR 10 when the array length is given as 5. But the array length is 5 here, but I am trying to access ARR of 10. That is the 10th element in the array. So this type of statements raise a runtime error that is called array index out of bounds exception. Okay. So, and the next one is the string out of bounds exception. Next one is the another type of exception is called a string out of bounds exception. Now indexing beyond the string limits is comes under this string index out of bounds exception. Okay. So for example, if the string is ABC, suppose my string is initialized with ABC. Now I am trying to locate the character at index 5. I want to find out the character at 5. Now this index 5 is not at all there. The index begins with this is 0, this is 1, this is 2. If the length, if the string is ABC, its length is 3 and whose index upper limit is 2. But if I am trying to access 5 character at the location 5, now this would leads to a runtime error that is known as the string index out of bounds exception. So this is called string index out of bounds exception. And the next one is the class cast exception. Next one is the class cast exception. So that is it is called invalid type casting at runtime. Invalid type casting at runtime. Suppose if you are trying to convert one class type into another class type. Suppose there is an object X, there is a class called object class is there. So this object class is the base class for all Java classes. This is it is a valid statement. Okay, this is a valid one. But this object class is trying to hold the typecasting that is new integer of 0 and string of X. String of X. So that is here X is object type here. Okay, what is X here? X is the object of type object class, but I am trying to convert it into string. Trying to convert it into string so that it is a typecast error or a typecast exception of this particular class. So this is known as the class cast exception. This is another type of exception class. Okay. So this is invalid typecasting at runtime. So this is another one. Next one is the number format exceptions. Next type of exception is number format exception. So what is this number format exception? So converting a malformed string to a number, suppose. Suppose I have a string here ABC. So this is a given string, but I am trying to convert this string into integer using the integer wrapper class. What is that integer wrapper class? That is integer dot parse int of ABC. Integer dot parse int of ABC. So now I am trying to convert this string ABC into integer. ABC into integer, so that it is going to generate a compile time, a runtime error that is known as the number format exception. This is called number format exception, converting a string to integer. So it's going to raise an error that is known as the number format exception. Okay. So this is another type of exception. And next one is the illegal argument exception. Next one is the illegal argument exception. So illegal argument exception means so passing inappropriate or illegal arguments to a method. Okay, passing inappropriate or illegal argument to a method. So for example, there is a built-in method like sleep method. It is a built-in method in the thread class. Okay. Suppose I am trying to invoke the sleep method on a negative number, on a negative integer, that is thread dot. Suppose I am writing this thread dot sleep minus 100. Thread dot sleep of this minus 100. Now this is going to raise an exception. What is that exception? Illegal argument exception. So because it is integer, so there is no problem at the compile time. So compiler is going to compile this particular statement successfully. So it will not be detected at the compile time. But during the execution of the program, so it leads to a runtime error, that is a runtime error called illegal argument exception. Illegal argument exception. So this is another type of exception. This is one of the runtime error. So next, coming to the another one, illegal state exception. Next one is the illegal state exception. So when this particular exception is going to rise is, so particular method is called at an illegal or inappropriate times. So whenever you invoke a particular method at inappropriate time. What is this inappropriate time? So for example, when you are doing the file operations, after closing the file, suppose if I am trying to invoke a read method or a write method on a particular file object, so that is called inappropriate time. And similarly, using this scanner class, suppose scanner object after closing it, after closing it. So in such case, it is going to raise an exception called illegal state exception. Illegal state exception. So this is another type of exception. And the next one is the negative array size exception. Another type of array exception is called negative array size exception. So that is when you are trying to create an array with a negative size. Because that is generally the statement to create an array is, suppose I want to allocate dynamic array like this, int a is equal to, I'm trying to create an array. So new int of, suppose I am entering -10. I'm entering -10. So because this 10 is integer, now this is going to compile successfully. There is no problem at the compile time. This statement is a valid Java statement, so that there is no compile time error here. There is no compile time error. But during the execution of this particular statement, so it is going to raise an exception called negative array size exception. negative array size exception. Okay, this is another type of exception class known as negative array size exception. Okay, so and the next one is the stack overflow error. Another type of exception is called stack overflow error. So now this is if there is no base condition. So when you are writing a recursive function, suppose now in a recursive function, what we should do is we need to write one base condition. Okay, for example, if you want to find out the factorial of a number, now you need to write one base condition. Okay, for example, if x equal to 1 or x equal to 0, so simply written x equal to 1, then simply written 1. Now, if otherwise, we need to invoke the recursive method f equal to, suppose, return x star factor of x minus 1. If there is no this base condition, suppose, if there is no base condition in the recursive call, so this may leads to an infinite recursion. This particular statement leads to infinite recursion. Now this particular error is known as the stack overflow error, because this to handle this recursive calls. So now this particular stack data structure will be used. This particular stack may be overflow. Okay, because of this infinite recursion. So this is another type of runtime error, so known as the stack overflow error. So these are all some of the examples for runtime errors or the exceptions. Okay, these are the two types of errors. So in a program generally called the compile time errors, and another one is the runtime errors. One is called compile time error, second one is runtime error. So these are all the examples for these compile time errors and the runtime errors. Okay. So now before we look into this, how to handle these runtime errors, now we'll see the basic information more about this particular exceptions. So in general, now in a Java, so generally an exception, basically it is an object of the relevant exception class. So what we have seen just now. So these are all the exception classes generally. So this is an arithmetic exception. It is a class. Null pointer exception is a built-in class. Array index out of bounds exception is another class. String index out of bounds exception is another class. Class cast exception and number format exception, illegal argument exception and illegal state exception, negative array size exception, and the stack overflow error. These are all predefined Java classes. Now, whenever there is an exception, for example, if there is an arithmetic exception or if there is a division by zero error, so it leads to arithmetic exception. Whenever there is an arithmetic exception, then automatically it is going to create an object for this particular class. Okay, it is going to create an object of the arithmetic class. So that's why this is an exception is an object of the relevant exception class. So when an error occurs or a particular exception occurs in a method, so it generally throws out an exception object that contains the information about so where this particular error occurred and what is the type of the error. Okay, what is the type of the error in our example? This is the division by zero error. For example, if it is an arithmetic exception, it is generally division by zero error. Now, whenever there is a division by zero error, so now it is going to create an object of the arithmetic exception class. So generally it is thrown to, it is generally it throws out an exception object. So now this particular object contains the information about the exception. What is the information about the exception? This is a division by zero error. And where the error occurred in the program or in a method and the type of the error. Here the type of the error represents here division by zero error. Now this particular error or exception object is passed on to the runtime system or particular runtime system. Now this particular runtime system searches for the appropriate code, this particular code can handle the exception. So this is the general scenario. Suppose if there is no exception handling mechanism, if there is no exception handling mechanism in a Java program, we'll see one example here. Suppose if there is no exception handling mechanism. So let us take one program here. Suppose EH, my program name is EH dot Java. My program name is EH dot Java is there. So let us take this class EH. So in this particular class, what we can do? Write one main method, public static void main. Here write string args. So let us take integer a equal to 10 and b equal to 0. Suppose a equal to 10, b equal to 0, and write one print statement here like this. So division is. So this is a by b. I'm writing division is a by b, suppose. And write another print statement here afterwards. Here I want to add addition is. I want to add a plus b. This is a plus b. So actually there is no problem with this addition statement here. Okay. Now I want to compile this code. So Java C EH dot Java. Sorry. Java C EH dot Java. So public, this public, public static void addition is this one. System dot out dot print ln. Okay. Error, not a statement. Int, this is the EA equal to. Okay. So Java C expected. Okay, I forgot the statement. Okay. So Java C EH dot Java and Java EH. So now see what happened here. There is an exception in thread main. There is an exception in thread main. What is that exception? Java dot lang dot arithmetic exception. Java dot lang dot arithmetic exception. What is this type of exception? Arithmetic exception, that is division by 0 at EH dot main Java 6. At line number 6, there is a statement that is division by 0. So that what happened is our program may be abnormally terminated from this particular statement because there is no handling mechanism here. There is no exception handling mechanism here. So that what happened is, even though there is no problem with this particular statement, our program is going to terminate from this point onwards, from this particular statement onwards. Why? Because there is a division by 0 error. This is a serious problem with these exceptions. When there is an exception, what happened is the program will not continue the execution. The program will not continue the execution. Instead of continue the execution, the program will stop at that particular stage. That is, there will be an abnormal termination of the program if there is a runtime error. If there is a runtime error or if there is an exception, then our program will terminate abnormally. That is the serious drawback with this exceptions. So that we need to handle these exceptions or the runtime errors very carefully in our Java program. Okay. So that is, you need to write a code to handle this particular exception. Now, such a exception handling statement is known as the exception handler. Now, the event handling code or the exception handling code you need to write whenever there is a runtime error. whenever there is a runtime error is caused in a program, we need to write the handling code also. We need to write the exception handling code also. So this particular exception handling code is known as the exception handler. What is exception handling? What is the meaning of exception handling? So the meaning of exception handling is, what is this exception handling? So exception, that is the process of handling raised exceptions in a program is called exception handling. Is known as exception handling. Okay. So the process of handling raised exceptions in a program is known as exception handling. Okay. So whenever there is an exception, what is that exception? That is a runtime error. Whenever there is a runtime errors are not detectable at the compile time. Okay. So we'll coming to know at the time of the runtime only. While executing our program only, we came to know that there is a runtime error. Okay. So now whenever there is a runtime error, what we have to do is, so we need to handle that particular runtime error. Now the process of handling these runtime errors, the process of handling the raised exceptions in a program are simply known as the exception handling. Such a process is known as exception handling, right? So that is the event handling code in a program is known as exception handler. Okay. That is what is an exception handling. Exception handling is a mechanism that is used to handle runtime errors. So like our arithmetic exception, array index, out of bounds exception, null pointer exception, number format exception, whatever it may be. All those types of exceptions are known as exception handling. Okay, now the exception handling ensures that the normal flow of application is not disrupted and the program execution proceeds smoothly. Now, if we incorporate this exception handling mechanism in this program here, in this particular statement, there is a problem. There is a runtime error in this particular statement. Now, even though there is a runtime error here, still the next statement, the following this particular statement should executes. So now this particular exception handling mechanism ensures that the normal flow of execution in a program, even though there is an exception, this ensures that the normal flow of application execution is not disrupted and the program execution proceeds smoothly. This is the one of the advantage of this exception handling mechanism. Okay. Now the exception handling code handles only the type of exception that is specified for it to handle it. Now in my program, suppose I write a code to handle the arithmetic exception, so that it is going to handle only arithmetic exceptions only. It will not handle other exceptions. Okay. So the appropriate code is the one whose specified type matches the exception thrown by that particular method. That is, if a method throws arithmetic exception, it is capable of handling only arithmetic exceptions. Other type of exceptions, it will not handle. Okay, it could not handle other type of exceptions. Now, if the runtime system finds such a handler, how it passes on the exception object to the handler. Now the exception handler is going to handle this particular exception. Suppose if an appropriate handler is not found, if the appropriate handler is not found, the program terminates. Okay, even though there is an exception handling mechanism, if the proper exception handler is not available, suppose I am throwing arithmetic exception, that is division by zero exception I am throwing. Okay, but I am not handling this particular arithmetic exception, but I am trying to handle array index out of bounds exception. Array index out of bounds exception I want to handle. I want to handle. So this is not at all matched, so that the program again terminates because there is no proper exception handler. Okay. So this is the case. So now the method that creates an exception may itself provide code to deal with it. Okay. So generally there are two blocks are there in our exception handling mechanism. Okay. So now let us see the detailed exception handling mechanism. How this particular exception handling mechanism works in Java. So now in general, so there are two blocks are there here. Okay. There are two types of blocks available in the exception handling mechanism. Okay. So one block here contains statements that cause exceptions. Statements that cause exceptions. Another block will be there in the exception handling mechanism. Statements that handle the exception. Statements that handle the exception. So that is, in general, when there is an exception, there are some steps are there here in the exception handling mechanism. So there are some steps are there. What we have to do is first you should find the exception. The first stage, what we have to do is find the exception. Find the exception. This is also called fit the exception. Find the exception. What is the type of the error? And then throw the exception. So whenever there is an exception, it is automatically creates an object of that particular exception class. So then throw this particular exception object. And then in the third stage, what you have to do is catch the exception object. So once it is thrown, what you have to do is you need to catch the exception object and finally handle the exception. Handle the exception. So these are the four major steps in the exception handling process. So one is these four statements are divided into two different blocks. Now the first two statements, one category. Next two statements comes under another category. Okay. So finding exception and throwing exception object. So these two are the responsibilities of this particular block. These two are the responsibilities of this particular block. Now this block responsibility is finding the exception and then throwing the exception object. For example, there is a division by zero error. Now immediately it is going to create an object of the arithmetic exception. Object of the arithmetic exception. So, and it is thrown to the next block. And it is thrown to the next block. Okay. So now the role of this second block is catch this particular object. So whatever the exception object thrown by this particular block one. So this object must be catched by this particular statement and then handle the exception in a proper way. Take the necessary steps to process this particular request. That is the exception. Okay, that is the duty of the second block. So this is another one. Next block. This block is going to perform these two steps. That is catch the exception object and handle the exception. Now this first block is known as this try block. First block is known as the try block and the second block is known as the catch block. Okay. This first block is the try block and the second block is the catch block. Now this is try and this is catch. These are the two important blocks in the exception handling mechanism. In exception handling process, these two are the important blocks. So one is try block, second one is the catch block. So what is the role of this try block? What it contains? Block means obviously it should be enclosed in between this open and the closed parenthesis. Here also open and the closed brackets are there. So block of statements. So what is the role of these statements in the try block? So statements, now the try block contains the statements that may cause exception. Suppose I am writing here C equal to A by B. Suppose if this B equal to 0, now this statement has an exception called arithmetic exception or division by 0 error. So that keep this statement inside this try block. So these type of statements are kept generally inside the try block. So this is called the try block statements that cause exception. Now once an exception is raised automatically, so create an object of that particular exception and it is thrown to the catch block. Now the catch block purpose is it is going to handle the exception. So that the catch block contains the statements that handle the exception. So this is the second block. These are the two important blocks in the process of exception handling. Okay. So now this is about this uh, try and the catch blocks. These two are the important blocks used to deal with the exceptions. So now the try block generally contains, as we discussed, the code that is likely to create an exception or generate an exception. So those statements are kept in the try block. So which may include the statements that may create or throw the corresponding exception objects. Okay. So this is one thing. And the exception object has a data member. So that sometimes keeps information about the type of the exceptions and it becomes an argument for this another block of code. So that is meant to deal generally with the exceptions. So there may be more than one catch block in a exception handling process. Okay. So sometimes the same try block may raise multiple exceptions here. So this is C equal to A by B. C equal to A by B is one statement. And if there is an array, suppose X is equal to, suppose there is an array is there, Y of 10, suppose. So if the array index 10 does not exist, then this automatically rise an exception called array index out of bounds exception. Array index out of bounds exception. So that you need to write another catch block here. In such case, you need to write another catch block. So that is if the program includes multiple catch blocks. Multiple catch blocks. Okay. So that is there may be more than one catch block in a program. So there are basically two models of this exception handling. So there are two models of this exception handling. So that is the exception handling facility supported in Java is generally based on determination. So now according to this model, so when a particular method encounters an exception, so the further processing in that method is terminated. So and control is transferred from the point where an exception occurs to the point where the nearest matching exception handler, that is the catch block, is located. Okay, whenever there is an exception here, so in this case, so this statement automatically creates an exception object here and it is thrown to the catch block. Okay, so this is about this general exception handling process. So now let us see the exception class hierarchy. Generally, there are two types of exceptions are the runtime errors, as we've seen in this particular diagram. So this is anyhow object is the parent class for all Java classes. And next in the class hierarchy, next one is the throwable class will be there. So there are two types of these runtime errors. So there are two classes corresponding to this runtime errors. So one is called this error, one is the error, and another one is the exception. So one is called error, and second one is the exception class. So under this error class, so there are different classes are there here. So linkage error and the thread death and the class format error and the virtual machine error and the internal error and the out of memory error and the other errors. So this we cannot handle this one. Okay. So on the other hand, another type of runtime errors are called these exceptions. So this is what we have seen here, different types of exceptions. So like a runtime exception and the arithmetic exception and the class cast exception and array store exception and the class not found exception and the illegal access exception and the interrupted exception. So these are all the most commonly occur exceptions in a Java program. So this is what we have seen here. These are all the different types of runtime errors. This is arithmetic exception and null pointer exception, array index, out of bounds exception, and the string index, out of bounds exceptions. So these are all seen. So this is the class hierarchy of the standard exception classes. So now there are subclasses of this exception class are there. So these are broadly subdivided into two categories. So generally two types of these exceptions are there. So one is the unchecked exceptions and second one is the checked exceptions. So these unchecked exceptions are the subclasses of this runtime exception. So derived from this particular exception class. So as I have seen in the exception class hierarchy. Okay. So for these exceptions, so the compiler does not check whether the method that throws these exceptions has provided any exception handler code or not. So, and the second type of exceptions is called the checked exceptions. So these are direct subclasses of the exception classes. These are the direct subclasses of the exception class. So and are not subclasses of the class runtime exceptions. So these are called so because the compiler ensures or checks that the method that throws checked exceptions deal with them. Okay. So these are the types of subclasses of the exception class. So one is the checked exception and the second one is unchecked exceptions. Okay. So this is the introduction part of the exception handling mechanism. Okay. So what is exception and what is exception handling and what are the two blocks available in exception handling mechanism. Okay, so in the next class, you will see what are various keywords used in the exception handling mechanism and how to use each and every keyword. Okay.